So now we are having Django Alpine and htmx ups and downs with Karen Tracey. Thank you, Karen.
Hello, can you hear me? I will try to remember to stand close enough that you can hear me with the microphones. I'm excited to be here and talk about this tool combination of Django, Alpinejs, and htmx that I started to hear about several years ago now and started using 2.5, 3 years ago. I'm curious how many of you are using this tool combination? Number, not everyone. How many of you are waiting on the sidelines, have heard the hype, but are thinking like, this is probably not for me. There's probably, I see at least one hand out there, yeah. Like waiting to hear what people are feeling about it after using it a few years. So hopefully this talk will give some idea of that sort of experience with using it, what I really enjoy about this tool combination, and what challenges or not roadblocks, but challenges and things that may come in if you start down this path of using this tool combination versus a more traditional front-end framework. As a roadmap for what I'll be talking through, I first want to talk about the promise that I saw in this tool combination, both individually in the individual libraries and frameworks, and then as a combination as to what I really hoped to see out of using this tool combination. I'll talk briefly about the upside. I feel like there's been a lot of upside talks and how great it is, so I'm going to focus mainly on high-level upside, and then a little bit more on some of the downsides, some of the challenges of this tool combination, perhaps, and then finally talk about the assessment we have, and some future plans we have for continued use of this tool combination. I have interspersed photographs in my talk to keep people awake and engaged. These, I am fully aware, given the name Alpine and ups and downs, should really be from my ski vacation, but I didn't take a ski vacation. So these are from my beach vacation, and they are, while they're all pictures from my vacation, they are chosen to try to reinforce some of the concepts that I am hoping to talk about. So this is a picture of a sunrise, which is intended to convey a promise of a beautiful day. So you can see there's pretty colors. There is also here, though, some clouds, so perhaps it won't be such a beautiful day. So that's part of that's the intent of my pictures. Hopefully they come through and convey what I'm intending. One last thing I should mention. I had intended, when I first proposed this talk, I thought I'd get into some coding and show some code. As I was preparing for a 30-minute talk, I realized that was going to be way too much to cover both the details of some code and all this other stuff that I just mentioned. So this is going to stay pretty high level. It's not going to get into deep coding, and there's not going to be code on the slides. But I'm happy to talk about specifics of code later on if you see me, whatever. So let's start with Django. Since I'm at DjangoCon, I'm expecting I don't need to convince you all that Django is a great web framework, but I do want to highlight what drew me to Django and what drew Cactus, the company, at least I believe this is what drew Cactus to using Django, which is the company I work for and have worked for over 10 years. We're a web development shop. We build custom applications for whoever wants it. So Django is our web framework of choice, and largely we love Django because of all the built-in features. It's got the access to the database via object relational mapper. It has now database migration, so you can update your database schema without a lot of effort. Admin, the killer app that lets you easily see your data in the database and maybe update it. Support for creating HTML in a templated fashion. Authentication for users, a permission framework that you can also customize to be like broad. It's broad to begin with, but you can customize it to be object-oriented if you want, per object permissions if necessary. It's got URL routing. It has support for forms in both the rendering of the forms and the accepting of the data coming in and validating that it's all good, and support for showing user error messages. So there's a whole lot of stuff that's included in Django. And then there is a very strong ecosystem of third-party packages that provide all sorts of other things that you might need as well. There are multiple CMS frameworks or packages to choose from if you want to create a site that non-technical administrators can create fancy websites. There's all sorts of small things, allowing you to use S3 storage buckets as your backend file storage. So there's a whole ecosystem of third-party packages. So if Django does not provide what you are looking for, you can probably find it in a third-party package if it's any sort of reusable, commonly needed thing. And this is what drew us to Django and keeps us with using Django. There's one aspect of Django that is misty and is not necessarily straightforward or not clear how to address, and that is the whole front end. Django is a back-end web framework. It does not have any opinion about what you should use for the front end. It doesn't have a JavaScript preference. It doesn't have a CSS preference. So you're all on your own there to figure out how to do that. And over the years, as the front end of web applications has become more and more advanced and fancy, it has become more and more common to use front-end web frameworks that end up duplicating a lot of that stuff that Django provides, like JSX instead of HTML template rendering, authentication via web tokens versus session authentication that Django provides. So as time progressed, it felt like there were more and more people who were using Django just for a REST API backend that you could easily add with Django REST Framework or other REST frameworks that Django has in the third-party ecosystem. So they were using less and less of the built-ins of Django because they were using the front-end web framework. And that felt to me very duplicative, and that's what excited me about these other tools that I'll get into now. Because my hope was they would allow for less duplication on the front and the back end of duplication of handling concerns. So the first one I'll talk about is HTMX, and what HTMX promises is rich server interactivity without having to write a lot of JavaScript. So HTMX asks the question, why is it that just a form and an anchor link, those are the only two elements that are defined to have interactivity with the server? Why can't you add HTML attributes to your HTML to say, when the user does this, go fetch a page from this server and update this part of the page, just a small part of the page, which gets you past the whole having to reload a full page when you submit a form, which is very clunky nowadays for your web applications. It keeps the server, generally speaking, in HTML so that your views can continue to return HTML and you don't have to instead return JSON that then the front end turns the JSON into HTML. And it's a dependency-free library that is very easy to add to your project. So it was very attractive and very exciting when I first heard about it. But it only deals with the client browser interacting with the server. And there's another aspect to a modern, user-friendly web application that is the interaction between the user and the client browser and what happens there. And that's where our Alpinejs comes in. And what Alpinejs does is it provides the ability to manage data on the front end associated with your HTML elements, and supports rich user interactivity. So you may have some data that starts out on the page as a Django variable, template variable, and then it is rendered in a way that is included in your JavaScript, and then as the user does something, clicks something, adds something, you may be changing that data on the front end to, maybe you're working through a form, and based on certain answers, you get shown other questions that you then have to answer. So it can support rich front-end user interactivity. It is also lightweight, and it's easy to add to a project, and it is 15 attributes, 6 properties, and 2 methods, so it's it, like HTMX, is also learnable. It doesn't come with a lot of concepts that you have to wrap your head around in order to start using it effectively. So overall, these three things seem to provide all the things you need to write a modern, user-friendly web application with great user experience. And this is the promise of this tool combination, which is a little brighter than the first one, but still a few cods. So the promise of the combination, just to reinforce, is to be able to utilize all these features that Django provides without duplicating concepts on the front and the back end. I want to be able to use Django's form rendering, which you can hook into and customize for yourself, and the validation, which you can hook into and customize per your application's needs. I want to be able to use Django's user authentication and Django's URL routing. I want Django, which provides all these things, to be the basic, the main thing that's providing all the heavyweight concepts that I'm using, and not have to duplicate a lot of that on the front end or figure out, okay, we're going to do JSX over here to do the rendering of this stuff from JSON. So I just didn't want to have to get into all that, deciding where to put a function. And I just want to be able to rely on Django to do it, and with the help of these other tools. So how's that worked out? What our experience has been, I'd say we started on a brand new greenfield project that had nothing. So, and we had been thinking before we saw these tools that we would go down the path of React for the front end of this, because it had some fancy forms and user interactivity that we thought we would need something like React. We heard about these tools, and the client was interested in pursuing these tools. So we started that project, I'd say 2.5 years ago, and our client had a client who needed it launched within 6 months. So, what they needed could be accomplished by a slimmed down version of the overall product that our client is working on, I'd say. So we did launch one version of that 6 months later, so about 2 years ago now. And that one is in production for that client. It was sort of a slimmed down, tailored to their particular need. And then over the last 2 years, we've continued to add features to that and grow out this product that our client is looking to build. And that's been successful. We continue to use these tools. We don't have any React, we don't have any other front-end framework, and we've been able to do sophisticated forms with choices that you make influencing the path you go down. Things like just managing the participants in this application where you have to add. They have emails, they have addresses, they have phone numbers, so those are form sets, and being able to use Django's facilities for form sets married with a little bit of Alpinejs and a little bit of HTMX is it's been very easy to use. We have also, over the last few years, as we continue to maintain other projects that existed long before we started using these tools, we started adding HTMX and Alpine individually or together to existing projects. I recently had to add some bulk action on a list kind of thing to a project that had jQuery as the only JavaScript it used. And I was initially going to just keep doing the jQuery thing, but I eventually decided this would be easier to do in Alpine, so I've taken the step of going ahead and starting to introduce Alpine into that project. And overall, I'd say both Alpine and HTMX are quick to learn, and we've had a number of people come in. No one has found it difficult to use this tool combination and to pick up these tools. They're both well documented as well, as is Django. The main thing that I really enjoy about this tool combination is the increased sharing and the blending of knowledge between the front and the back end developers. In our company, we have a lot of very small teams, maybe just one or two or three developers. So to have a very hard line between, or a very bright line, and a lot of knowledge needed to work effectively in the back end as well as the front end, had been leading towards a real difficulty of being able to handle, of having a developer on a project be able to sort of feel like they could own the whole scope from the front end to the back end. I know I, as a back end developer, felt couldn't be effective on the front end with React. I couldn't learn that on top of everything else I was doing. So I feel much more effective and much more able to both simply review things from front-end focused developers using these tools, all the way to being able to implement things myself on the front end, if that's the path we need. So the increased ability to sort of have a team that sort of owns the whole scope of the application, I find really great about this tool set. And am I doing time-wise? Not as well. But, so everything's sunshine and light. Maybe, there are a few things I am aware of that areas of challenge that I'd like to talk about. So that's indicated by some cloudy days. The first one I talk about, this slide is focused mainly on the complexities that can start to appear in your templates. You've brought in HTML attributes for htmx, the server interaction. You've brought in HTML attributes for Alpinejs. If you're using something like Tailwind, you probably have a long string of classes on a lot of things, so it can get to be really overwhelming to look at some of these templates. And it can be kind of hard to say, what is this doing? So that's just something to be aware of and something to figure out how to address. It can be overwhelming. And I worry for new developers who are learning all of these things at once in looking at one of these templates. Are they even going to be able to know, oh, this is an Alpine thing versus this is an HTMX thing, or this is a CSS class from Tailwind? So you've got, I saw a tweet thread on this as I was traveling here. You've got CSS presentation things, you've got server interactivity things, and you've got user interactivity things all coming together in the same place, and that can just be overwhelming. Another thing that it can be confusing and complex is the thinking through the complexity of, you've got a template rendering time when you have access to your Django context variables, and you've got template tags and filters that you can pass in these variables, but they may then turn their scope of life then becomes a JavaScript variable, and then that can get updated as the JavaScript runs in the browser. And sometimes that can be a little tricky to think through exactly how that works, and how do you keep track of what is going on. And then there's just this other thing that is kind of annoying. You're using HTML attributes to define some JavaScript in your Alpine, and then inside your JavaScript you may need a quoted string. Then inside that quoted string you may need a quoted string. And it's like, whoa, how do I do that? And you may need that, particularly if you're influencing the styling using the CSS selector. Often you're going to need a quoted string within a quoted string. And one way I found to do that is to use the ampersand quote semicolon construct, but that's really ugly. So it's just like, I don't know, that just feels to me like maybe we're doing too much in one place here. And one thing you can do to alleviate this complexity is, with Alpine, you can not put your JavaScript necessarily in your HTML attributes, but you can extract it out into JavaScript files and then just reference some higher level names that you define in your JavaScript. So you can do that, and then you're not putting so much JavaScript right in your templates. There are trade-offs there, because then you get when you have the JavaScript right there, you can see what it's going to do, and you can wrap your head around it. If you extract it out and you refer to it via some name you've defined, it isn't as clear. You have to then go check the JavaScript file for what exactly does this do when it runs. So complexity in the templates is one area that I find a little bit troubling about this tool combination. And coming from a long-term Django history, I've been using Django for going on 2 decades. I remember learning early on, or being told early on, that the Django template language was intentionally limited and intentionally not very complicated, because that's not where you want to put your complexity. Django's philosophy was you should have your business logic complexity in your Python code, either in your views or in your model methods, and you really shouldn't have a lot of complexity in your templates. So coming to this tool combination and starting to see a lot of complexity appearing in templates kind of makes me say, is this a good direction? And so it's just a lot. Here's my picture of a lot of birds on the beach doing all sorts of things and starting to fly off because I was getting too close to them. The second area I want to talk about of downside is reuse of these templates that you're building that include CSS and server interaction and user interactivity. So I am a big fan of reusing code. If I start to do pretty much the same thing, only a little bit different in Python, I will easily say, okay, we can abstract out this bit of it, and this is a parameter that gets passed in, and then this is the base code, and based on what is passed, it does something slightly different. So I want to do that kind of thing in HTML templates as well. It's a lot harder when you've got all these things coming together. You can break out bits of HTML and have those included in your templates. So Django does offer the ability to include one template inside of another, but it is entirely unstructured, and there is no support for like, this template requires these variables, and so if these aren't in the context, something should blow up and say, hey, you shouldn't do this. So that it's unstructured, and there's no good support that I have found for doing that in a way that makes it clear to someone reading it or looking at it that, I'm looking at this included template, it references some Alpine. Where did that come from? Like, it can be difficult to figure out how to reuse. And then just another little nit. If you've got your JavaScript in your HTML template, a lot of times your editor isn't going to recognize it as JavaScript. So if you're used to your editor guiding you in terms of syntax coloring, and when you've made a typo, it doesn't recognize something, you're not going to get that in your HTML. Usually, at least my editor doesn't highlight my JavaScript errors in my HTML. So that can be another little roadblock. So this is my picture of what a template may end up looking like. It's complicated and kind of messy, and what the heck is going on here? That's a lot of crabs, sand crabs were in the same place and came out and made little mounds. So those are the two main things I want to focus on, is the complexity that can come up in templates, and then how do you go ahead and reuse those things? How do you facilitate reuse? And here I come to my assessment and plans. I still think this is a winning combination. I'm still intending to continue to use these tools. I do think we need to be aware of complexities and the reuse issues and come up with a plan of how to deal with that. As I said, there is one project I work on that has jQuery, and I do hope over time to migrate from using jQuery on that app to using Alpinejs. I do think one of my goals moving forward is to come up with a better guideline for myself and my team for how to build Alpine components and how to structure your Alpine components, and guidelines around when you want to put the JavaScript in the templates and when you want to extract the JavaScript out of the templates and have them be in JavaScript files. I don't yet have a good feel for that, but I do feel like making that step and coming up with some guidelines there would be a way to make this tool combination more sustainable over time and more maintainable over time. So that is my talk. I have 1 minute, I think, for questions.